Now the wheel has been laced up, it's time to fit the bearings to the hub and then adjust the spoke so the rim runs true and in the correct plane laterally. Using the brake disc as a temporary hub stand, the inner dust seal is dropped into place on the sprocket side of the hub. The bearing and axle spacer assembly are then placed into the hub, and a suitable piece of tubing is used with a bearing drift to drive the assembly into place. This bearing, when located against the shoulder in the hub, locates the wheel laterally. Unfortunately, the shoulder is somewhat fragile, and if the bearing is hammered in too energetically, it can break the shoulder away from inside the casting. When this happens, the bearing has nothing to locate against and the hub can move sideways in operation. If left unresolved, this then leads to the 4 retaining bolts and their nuts digging into the speedo drive and gradually destroying it. A satisfactory repair can be made by dismantling the wheel and separating the hub sections to gain access to the broken surface, which can then be recessed in a lathe down to the point where the shoulder previously started. An alloy ring can then be machined up to fit into that recess and then TIG welded into place, recreating the shoulder that broke away. The speedo drive ring is then screwed into place. It does not need to be very tight, as the load applied by the speedo drive will tighten it rather than unscrewing it. The sprocket is now fitted and retaining bolts inserted. Flipping the wheel over and using the sprocket as a hub stand, the spacer tube is placed through the hub into the assembly we just inserted from the sprocket side. The large end will fit through the dust seal onto the boss pressed into the bearing. The disc side inner dust seal is then fitted. It should be a light interference fit and may require a light tap with a pin punch or suitable piece of tubing. This one slipped in easily. The disc side bearing and axle spacer assembly is then drifted into place so it rests against the spacer tube. Once again, minimal force is required here. The outer dust seal is then fitted into place. Take great care not to press this in further than the circlip. Which is then fitted to secure it in place. The brake disc is then fitted, followed by the 4 nuts and washers which are tensioned up to complete the hub assembly. We now turn our attention to truing up the rim. No rolled and welded steel rim is a perfect circle. There is always a bump where the 2 ends are butt welded together. However, it is still possible to get a rim like this running to quite accurate tolerances just the same. By tightening all the nipples up till the spokes are flush with the bottom of the screwdriver slots in the nipples, you will very likely be within 80 to 90% of the correct finished position. From there, a pointer, or in this case a dial indicator, will allow you to finish the job. The rim has to run in the correct plane sideways with minimal run out in all directions. Start by getting the rim to run evenly on its axis. Here, a dial indicator running on the bead area of the rim shows very accurately how much run out there is. If you have a high spot, loosen a group of spokes in the low area and tighten the opposite spokes correspondingly, making more adjustment towards the centre of the group of spokes and tapering off as you move outwards. Continue until you have as little run out as possible and then focus on sideways or lateral run out. Repeat the process, moving back and forth between lateral and axial, checking until you have the wheel running true in both planes. The final stage is to adjust the rim so it is running in the correct plane. That is, ensuring it is not off to the side in either direction. Before you dismantle the wheel, make sure you have taken accurate measurements so you know where it needs to sit when completed. To make sideways adjustment, loosen all spokes on the side of the hub you need to move away from and tighten all spokes on the side you need to move towards by the same amount, and then recheck all of your previous run-out measurements as they may have changed. Continue until you have your wheel as perfect as possible. By tapping spokes with your spoke tool, you can hear how tight they are. They should all be a similar pitch. If any have a dead sound, they need to be tightened up till they are similar to the rest. Once again, recheck your rim is true after this step. As this is a rear wheel, the bead locks have been replated and are now ready to be reassembled. Pop rivets work fine to secure the rubber to the bead lock. The front wheel is similar to the rear wheel, except the hub is narrower than the rear wheel and the rim sits centrally between the two flanges in the hub rather than being offset like the rear wheel. To fit the axle to the wheel, secure it in a vise. Grease the bearing surface and place the bearing onto the axle. Use a suitable tubular drift to hammer the bearing into place against the shoulder. This shoulder locates the bearing laterally. Insert the inner dust seal. Using a solid support that will not damage the hub face it comes in contact with, insert the axle. Do not use force against the axle to insert the bearing, or damage may result to the bearing internally. Using suitable tubular drifts, tap the outer race of the bearing into the hub. I did not need to fit the retaining nut when I did, and now it needs to come off to fit the bearing retainer. Do not use a pin punch to tighten this retainer or damage will occur. Use the correct tool to nip this up firmly. It does not need to be super tight. The nut can now be fitted permanently, finger tight at this stage. Flip the wheel over and tap the inner dust seal into place. Grease the bearing surfaces and slip the bearing onto the axle. Use a drift to tap the inner race onto the axle, stopping once it is deep enough to allow the outer dust seal to be fitted into the bore above it. Once again, take great care when fitting the outer dust seal, not to damage it and not to tap it in too far, as you want the circlip that holds it to sit up against it when fitted. With the axle held between soft jaws in a vise, nip up the bearing retaining nut. Ensuring the surfaces are perfectly clean, fit the brake disc in place. Fit the 4 retaining bolts, washers and nuts, and then tension them up evenly. The front wheel is now complete. That's it, job done successfully.